The last talk is about quantum startup ecosystem. It's a landscape of it. I think this is not first work by Zeki on this area. We can say maybe he's a kind of now professional quantum photographer taking landscapes in quantum world. Thanks, Zeki, and stage is yours.
Thank you, and thanks for the organizers, and thanks for this great event. I think it has been going really well, and thanks to everyone that is still around after we are close to the second end of the second session. So as Abu said, this is technically my third landscaping study. The first one was on bibliometrics, the academic landscape, the publication landscape. And the second one was on patents in quantum technologies. And this one is on quantum startups. I'm Zeki. I'm originally from Turkey. I'm one of the co-founding members of QTurkey. I'm a member of QWorld. And currently I'm at Karlsruhe Institute of Technology, Institute for Technology Assessment and Systems Analysis. And this work is a collaboration between Middle East Technical University, which is my previous institution, Science and Technology Policy Department, and ITAS in KIT. Here is a brief outline of today's talk. Here are my email addresses, my LinkedIn. You can reach me through either of these. And for today, I will briefly talk about the overview of quantum technologies. I think everyone here are almost familiar with this topic, so I will be quick about this. I will explicitly talk about our research questions for this paper, our data set, how we prepared it, and what are our limitations, which I think is an important topic for studies like this. Later, I will move to the categorization of quantum technology startups and our findings, some discussions, conclusion, and I hope that there will be some questions that we can further elaborate the outcomes. So quantum technologies, here you can see the EU framework. Mainly there are 4 pillars: communication, computation, simulation, and sensing and metrology. In the US framework, simulation and computation are combined, so there are 3 pillars there. And here you can see different horizontal layers that engineering control, software theory, and education training, and all are founded upon the basic science. And the developments in this field are not new, but they are not as old as some of the other topics. Here you can see some of the outcomes from our previous studies. This is the number of articles. This is, if you're in the field, this is very expected, and this is the patent families. So as you can see, in the recent years, there have been some real, let's say, interest in the field. And this is the distribution of total number of published academic articles. So for academic articles, we are using Web of Science, WOS index. But you can do a similar study with Scopus as well. The numbers will change, but we don't believe that the distributions will differ that much. Here you can see some usual suspects: China, US. In EU, you can see Germany, UK. UK is not in the EU, but still in Europe, and Japan. And for the patents here, remember that this data is from 2019 or 2020. I don't remember exactly, but you can check the abstract. Here you can see the number of active individual patent grants per country. And China and US are the leading ones. Combined, they hold more than half of the total patents in the field, which is not very surprising because China holds more than 1/3 of the entire patents there are. So it is not a huge surprise that China also has this many patents in quantum technologies, which are followed by Japan, Korea, and UK. So here you can see Europe is a little bit lagging behind. And so after looking at those things like the publications and the patents, we wanted to ask the following questions because we were curious about the startup landscape. So the first question is, what are the temporal and geographical distributions of the quantum startups? A pretty straightforward question. How can quantum startups be categorized, and how are these categories populated? And what type of patterns can be derived from empirical data on trends? So the dataset covers 421 companies in 42 countries. All of these are startups, and by startups we mean companies that are just founded and their main focus should be quantum technology. So we exclude the startups and larger companies that later joined the field. For example, we do not include IBM in our analysis, or we do not include a company like Toptica or Tor Labs. There might be, and probably are, some companies with no online activity, since we mainly use public and online resources. And if these companies are active only in their local languages, or they are in stealth mode, then they are omitted in our dataset. So we want to argue that our dataset is not exhaustive, but representative. But it may end up with outlier results for countries with small sample sizes. So if a country only has a single QT startup and we missed it, this means that the country is not represented here. So the categorization of these startups, so we thought about this a little bit because the four main pillars that were provided by the EU framework, well, they do not exactly match the activities of the companies. For example, there is this growing field of supporting companies, so they are not in one of the vertical pillars, but they are operating in horizontal pillars. So what we did was, since the majority, or let's say a huge number of the companies were operating in the quantum computing field, we divided that into two, well, let's say categories. First one is the companies that were more focused on the hardware side. They might also still be doing software, application, and simulation, but if they are developing a quantum hardware, we consider them as hardware companies. And of course, there are many companies that are mainly focused on software, application, and simulation. And for this category, for quantum cryptography and communication, we mainly considered the companies that are providing cryptography tools and certain communication efforts. So the companies that are in this category are mainly dealing with QKD, sometimes PQC, post-quantum cryptography, depending on their focus on quantum side, and certain developments for quantum internet. And for complementary technologies, for example, you can count companies that are developing dilution refrigerators or control electronics, companies that are mainly focused on that side, and they are not developing, any of these other things. Like they are not developing quantum computing hardware, quantum computing software, communication, cryptography, sensing for themselves. So they are mainly complementary technologies. And for supporting, of course, the education, consulting, and market analysis, that kind of companies. So here you can see one of the first outcomes that we have. This is the number of new quantum startups per year, and here you can see some decline. This is not because of or we assume that this is not because there is an actual decline, but this is because that so since we were collecting data in 2021, of course there might be some companies that were just newly founded and they are not active online. There are certain companies that are in stealth mode that we know that they're in stealth mode, but they have no active, let's say, internet presence, or we do not know anything else about them. So we just know that they exist. So here you should not consider this like oh, it peaked and it is slowing down, but you should consider this as we need more data. And here you can see the distribution with respect to countries. So again, the usual suspects are here: US, Canada, UK. So the Anglo-Saxon world is overly represented, which is not a surprise because the startup culture is mainly and coming from US and UK, and also a considerable number of companies are present in Germany, France, some in China, India, and so on. So here you can see, so this is a Weilen plot of new quantum startups per year in different fields. So this means that the area inside these graphs correspond to the 100% of the companies, and the size is the distribution of those companies being founded in different years. So here you can see quantum computing hardware and cryptography communication has been around for the longest period. You can, I suspect that you can consider which companies are here. But supporting companies are a more recent phenomena. Software, application, and simulation companies are again considerably newer phenomena. But for example, quantum sensing and metrology, it is almost, I mean, it's not uniformly distributed, but it is almost uniformly distributed. So one of the, well, let's say, discussions that we have regarding this distribution is that there are already established companies, established startups, especially coming from the photonic sector, that are already filling the market gaps in quantum sensing and metrology, so that there is not that much opportunity to start a quantum startup in sensing and metrology that is mainly focused on just the quantum aspects of the market. And here you can see these in terms of absolute numbers, and it is not a surprise to see that the software application and simulation side is overly represented, because I mean, you can develop many arguments for that side, but mainly it requires a lower amount of investment, hence it is a lower risk to start a startup in this field than, let's say, compared to the hardware field. Again, this is a different way of showing what we showed 2 slides ago. But here it is important to see that almost all of these, except the supporting companies and the sensing, are overlapping. So the combined efforts are pretty much, let's say, combined together. So it is not like, all quantum computing is doing the best and the rest are irrelevant. They are rising together. And the supporting companies are a more recent phenomena, but again, they are almost rising at the same time. But you can see quantum sensing and metrology is a bit of a different story. So here you can see, so this is the same thing, but with categories emphasized, let's say. And here you can see that there are different distributions of different categories in different countries. There are certain countries with only single companies that are operating in this or that field. But one of the important things to note here is that there is diversity in especially the countries with multiple companies, let's say multiple startups. So even countries with 2 or 3 startups have a certain amount of diversity in terms of the categories that the startups are being founded. So it would not be a good way to formulate that certain countries are only interested in certain aspects of the quantum technologies. Because if a country has multiple quantum startups, it is really highly likely that these startups will be in different categories rather than the same category. Here again, you can see the distribution of countries, how well they are represented or active in different fields. So the most diverse field is quantum computing, software application simulation. It is followed by cryptography, communication, and supporting companies. One of the least diverse fields are sensing and metrology and complementary technology. So I think it is important to analyze this further while for specific questions, but as a landscaping study, we can say that this is the situation. So this is another analysis. So here it is a yearly frequency of value analysis, which means that you can actually identify or hope to identify by looking at this picture which country was more interested in which category at which year. So here you can see the countries that have been active in the field for the longest time have started seeing supporting companies being more important or more recent here, especially in US and UK. It is very apparent. And in other countries, you can see that the distribution is really diverse in a sense that there is no consolidation into single categories. So some discussions regarding the distribution. First, we can say that the temporal distribution of the QT startups ecosystem is not uniform, which is not a surprise. More than 90% of the startups have been founded within the last 10 years and more than, let's say, 65% of in the last 5 years. So you can say that 2 out of 3 startups that have been founded were founded in the last 5 years. So it is just by itself it's indicating something. And the second, the geographical distribution is not uniform either. More than 50% of the startups are located in the US, the UK, and Canada. Although there are 42 countries in our dataset, only half of them have more than 2 startups. So we can say that there is something like a Pareto distribution in terms of how many startups are active in which countries. So for categories, it can be seen in figure 2 that the most uniformly populated field is quantum sensing. Furthermore, it can be argued that there are established companies that are filling the market gap that might provide the necessary incentive for a startup to be founded. So as said before, one of our main assumptions here is that those startups are being founded to address certain market gaps. So there should be an opportunity for that startup to fill a market gap, and if no such gap is apparent in a field, no startups will be founded. The second thing is we can say that the major initiatives like the flagship in the EU and the National Quantum Initiative Act in the US, signaling that there will be increased market activity and funding opportunities in the following years, caused or supported the spike following 2016. So this is a pretty standard and by the books thing in terms of technology policies, especially in the STI field, science, technology, innovation. Signaling is it is a tool for governments. You provide these signals to the market, and by market, I'm not only referring to the commercial activities, I also the academia as well. You signal that a certain topic is important for you or is going to be important for you as a government, and you will be supporting the activities that will take place in that field, which aligns or helps market actors to align themselves towards taking action in response to the signal that you provided. So it is called signaling. which is very apparently seems that it worked. It was used as a tool and was received by the market actors, and the startups are being founded since the announcement of such programs. And the third one is our data clearly shows the emergence of supporting companies around the newly established quantum technology sector. So the businesses of these companies are mainly consultancy, ecosystem support and development, reporting, event organization, and education. So it is important because development of such, these companies or the founding of these companies indicates that it shows us that there is a real ecosystem being formed around these technologies. So this means that there is a need for companies that provide support, provide education, provide reporting, provide consultancy. Of course, there might be a discussion in terms of, how much of this is because of the quantum hype and how much of this is because the companies actually require these services. It is a different discussion, which is also being researched right now by others. There's a great team at Aalto University doing research on this kind of topics. But it is important to acknowledge that this is a phenomenon that is happening in the quantum field. So for patterns, the number of countries that contain interested entrepreneurs toward QT been increasing, especially since 2016. This is not a surprise, but we can consider this as a way of developing certain projections. We can argue that in 5 years there will be like 60 countries being represented in this ecosystem. This is important and a little bit, well, not controversial, but we will see whether this holds or not. It appears that low levels of startup activity usually precede the formulation of national initiatives, and the number of startups rises after such initiatives are announced. If this can be generalized, we can expect national initiatives in more than 20 countries where startups emerged following 2016. So this was a little bit funny because in the data, when you are looking at the data, you can see that it goes like this. There are just a couple of startups being founded, 1 or 2, and then there is the formulation of this national framework or the national program or a national roadmap, and then the number of startups are increasing. So if this is a general trend, or if this is something that happens in an emerging field, we can assume that the countries with 1 or 2 startups will develop their own national initiatives in the coming years. So of course, not all startups are created equal. Some have considerably higher seed funds and investment. We know, just PsiQuantum it has more than $700 million for investment. However, one can assume infer that there is a relationship between the number of startups and the number of startups with such huge fundings. So if your country has more startups, it is more likely that there will be some startups with considerably larger funding. So for the future, an open question, the QT ecosystem development predictions is whether there is room for further diversification or if the time for consolidation is soon. It is an important question. We can discuss it in the Discord if you're interested. We expect a further expansion of categories. For example, quantum communication and cryptography should be divided between quantum internet efforts and QKD efforts and PQC efforts. And quantum sensing development and applications should also be divided because there are certain companies that are using quantum sensors for application purposes, and there are certain companies that are developing quantum sensors. And while gathering data, we noticed the emergence of a new group of organizations within the quantum ecosystem, which are non-profit organizations like QWorld and similar supporting entities. So this is the summary of our paper. You can actually check it is on archive. Also here is the QR code. And conclusion and some questions for you. The QT startup ecosystem is emerging and the trends should be closely followed? Will the growth slow down, accelerate, diffuse? Will the ecosystem further diversify or consolidate? How are the startups doing fiscally? Can they survive a quantum winter? Why are the founders funding these startups? I think it's an important question. And here I think it is important to acknowledge some of the achievements of these startups. For example, Xanadu just recently announced that they reached quantum computational advantage. I think it makes them the first startup that reached this milestone. And again, Blue Force is a very important actor in this field. So the Sandbox AQ is a spin-off from Google, which is a different strategy than what IBM is doing. And I think some of you know this. This is the SKT IDQ chip, QRNG chip, which is used in the Galaxy Quantum. You know, there is a phone called Galaxy Quantum that is being sold in South Korea. There is even a second phone, which is Galaxy Quantum 2. So for final remarks, if you want to check the dataset, just send me an email. If you're a QT startup founder and willing to be interviewed, send me an email. If you think that the analysis omitted your company, so if you are from a country that is not represented here, but you have a company, send me an email. If you wish to collaborate on this type of research on quantum technologies, of course, send me an email. So here are my email addresses. And I would like to thank you for listening to me.
Thanks, Zeki. We exceed time, but no problem. I think we can get a few questions. I think we already have a startup also. They gave a presentation here. Maybe they can reach you. As I understand, you also want to make some interviews with them. So you want to extend research. So maybe some of the speakers are already here. I remember some labs or something. So one question is about Latin America. So there is a huge gap. And it's possibly because of politics, investment, etc. And how to get a first inertia impulse for this geographical zone. What would you say?
I think it is, you know, it's a good question, because one of the topics that I'm also interested, because I'm from Turkey, is that, you know, what about the third world? How can we support developments there? I mean, QWorld is doing really great stuff, and other institutions, other organizations are also doing stuff in terms of education and workforce development, but it is not enough for, you know, a startup ecosystem to be founded there. They need investment, they need some support from the existing industry. So in terms of South America, I think there are some great efforts. For example, Cureca is organizing this Quantum Latino event there, and I know there are many participants there that are actively participating in such events, and they are planning to find some startups. So I don't think they are, you know, that behind in terms of what is going on in, let's say, Southeast Asia. But of course, this startup game is dominated by US and UK and Canada, because it is a cultural thing. And it is also a legal thing. It is much easier to fund a startup and fail as a startup and, you know, not be that affected in Canada and US is comparatively different than founding a company in Turkey and failing. So there are some differences like that that might be, you know, affecting people's motivations, let's say.
I think I can make a remark here. So after education, I mean, if you have some interest, etc., maybe very first steps can be, for example, unitary fund. You can just get very small fund. It's kind of also approval that your project is nice, good, and then you can really maybe go to startup, etc. So Nasser asked, can you please give more details on what the supporting companies work on?
Yeah, sure. So, for example, Cureca is one of the supporting companies. They are doing quantum careers and resources. They are organizing events. They are acting as sort of an HR company as well. But there are other, well, let's say, consultancy firms. And by firms, what I mean is that they're mainly either a single person or just a couple of people that are doing this kind of stuff. There are some players in the field that are providing data. For example, Quantum Insider is one of them. I mean, Quantum Daily, and they have this platform, Quantum Insider. So you can find these, let's say, companies that are supporting and especially in terms of consultancy, and also there in education as well. For example, there are several companies that are developing educational tools, quantum games, to support the efforts of the, let's say, Quantum Flagship or the Nation Quantum Initiative Act. So those kind of companies are accounted as supporting companies in our analysis.
Okay, last questions can be Oxana. Oxana, maybe you can ask directly by unmuted.
Thank you. All right. So, Zeki, I was actually asking for the lack of feelings in these disciplines. Like, so the fundings and the beginning for technology was pushed by the government because it needed this transit from the universities labs to the companies. And my question is there something that is considered to be a self-sustainable level for the ecosystem when the government pulls back, in a sense that, okay, now let's invest this in some other, like where it needs the push? So does it exist? And if yes, when do you think we may expect this to be happening? Are we close? Are we far?
I think we are far away from that, but there was this really good report and book by National Academic Press in the US, and they describe something called a virtuous cycle. So this is what happened in the semiconductor industry as well. Initially, governments pushed and supported the development until a point that the operating revenues and incomes of these companies were at a point that was able to support itself and also the R&D activities, and through their sales they supported R&D, they developed better products, and it became a cycle which is not a vicious cycle but a virtuous cycle in a sense. For that to happen, I think we are seeing some signs of that for fields like quantum cryptography. What IDQ is doing is pretty similar to that. They can survive and even flourish without government support. But for quantum computing, I think we are not close, because one of the things that should happen for that scenario to occur is that there should be kind of a winner, because currently there are many different potential futures that the companies do not know whether the quantum computers of tomorrow will be using superconducting devices or ion traps or photonics. So even in terms of investments, it is still a high risk, high risk, high reward situation. But that is not how usual industry works. It works with relatively low risk and low to medium return. So the quantum technology should become pretty much a normal technology. We do not say that oh, it is really risky to invest in gaming industry, or we do not say it's for the IT industry, but we are saying it for the quantum industry. And when the developments occur in a sense that much of the developments become predictable, let's say in the next 5 to 10 years, and the products are more or less settled in terms of design, then I think it would be the first sign for the government to stop supporting. I think the real let's say comparison should be made with the nanotechnology, because nanotechnology was supported for a long time by the governments, and now they are stopping supporting these nanotechnology efforts because the sector is able to stand on its own legs.
And how long did it take?
I think so for nano, I think it was the National Initiative on Nanotechnology was enacted in 2001 or 2002, if I'm not mistaken. So, or maybe on 2000. So it ran for 15 or 17 years, and it was, I think it is still active in a sense, but on a lower capacity. So it takes something like 20 years. So we should see this, if it is the same, time span, we should see this happening in 2035, maybe 2040.
So we can hope when the next quantum flagship will come.
It should, or may, because so we are seeing something similar in AI as well, right? AI has been around for quite some time, but after 2017, AI is everywhere, but it is still being supported in really huge amounts. So AI is producing a lot of revenue, but it's still requiring government support. So in a sense, we should not think, public procurement and government support, not just for, labs to market idea. It is also a way for governments to actually nudge the development of these technologies in a way that they seem more fit, because otherwise the market forces may go in a different direction that the governments do not want. So in a sense, they are paying for the development of these technologies so that the technologies are developed in a manner that is more in alignment with the agenda of these governments or the regional entities like EU.
I see. Thanks a lot.
So Zeki, if you have enough money, which startups you would invest? Just personal opinion.
Currently?
Quantum startups, yes. If you have some millions now in your pocket.
I think I would invest in startups that are doing medical stuff. And
quantum medical.
Yeah, especially the ones that are developing products or applications with quantum sensors for medical purposes, because the medical sector is really booming right now. And it was booming even before COVID, and now it is really booming. So I think combining those in terms of startups is a really good idea, because it is a really high-tech field. For example, there's this EU project that one of the partners is developing these MEGs. So we have EEGs, but that are using electrical fields, but instead you can use magnetic fields as well, but you require really high precision magnetometers for that, and it is difficult to obtain those. You need to use these huge superconducting devices, so you need to use the squids that are like MRI devices. But if these companies are working on miniaturizing those so that they can become variable technologies, you can move while you are being imaged. Like, so think about getting an MRI, but you are free to move. So I think that kind of technology will be available in the next 20 years, thanks to the developments in quantum sensing and photonics.
Okay, thank you, Zeki. Very nice presentation.